Welcome in, Minnesota sports fans. Jonathan Harrison here alongside Joe Nelson on the latest episode of Bring Me the Sports on YouTube. Joe, we've got 4 topics to discuss here today. 4 big topics across Minnesota sports that we've written about across all our websites, Inside the Vikings, Inside the Twins, and all Timberwolves on SI. You can go read those articles here, but let's break this down. Let's start off with topic 1, Joe. Too low, too high, or just right? ESPN ranked the Minnesota Vikings in their first power rankings of the season as the number 23 team. That puts them last place in the NFC North behind the Lions at number 4, Packers at number 10, and the Bears at number 17. Is that too low, too high, or just about right?
I think it's probably just about right, and it's pretty fair considering they won 7 games last year. They don't have Kirk Cousins back, and there's so many unknowns. Jordan Addison's ankle is a big unknown, and without him, are they one-dimensional, especially with Hawkinson potentially starting the season on the PUP list? It's probably just right, and then you look at their schedule. It is very difficult to begin the season. I still believe it's more evidence, though, that this is just a big sleeper team that could rise rapidly up the rankings with a good start. There's so much talk this preseason and training camp about how good the defense has looked. Brian Flores apparently loves it. Kevin O'Connell apparently loves it. The front 7 is looking rather dominant by all accounts in Cleveland in the joint practices and through 2 preseason games. There's been some good surprises. Dallas Turner looks like he's going to be an absolute stud rushing off the edge. So I'm pretty optimistic about it, and I think Matthew Collar from Purple Insider put it really well in his latest piece that we published on Vikings on SI, that the signing of Stephon Gilmore is evidence that the Vikings really do believe they can be dangerous this year. So it really is all about Sam Darnold. How good is he going to be managing the team and helping them keep that offense humming? If they could do it last year with Nick Mullins and Josh Dobbs and Jaron Hall, I see no reason why they can't be consistently good with Sam Darnold here in 2024. And if the defense is as good as everybody thinks it's going to be this year, then yeah, that 23rd ranking in the power rankings probably looks a little bit low in a few weeks from now if they're off to a good start.
Do you think they are the worst team in the NFC North that suddenly got very competitive this offseason?
You know what? It did get competitive, but, we see a lot of highlights of Caleb Williams in Chicago.
He looked good this weekend.
Yes, of course. Yeah, the highlights look awesome. But guess who else's highlights looked really good last year, too? Justin Fields. These are preseason games. The Packers just scored 2 points. They're the second best team in the NFC North based on these power rankings and number 10 overall in the NFL. So
that's too high for me.
Yes, you can't really believe a lot of it. I'll say this. I looked at the power rankings from ESPN, and I think Indianapolis, even though they won 9 games last year, they have Anthony Richardson at quarterback. Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be good? Is he going to live up to the top 5 pick hype that came with him when they drafted him out of Florida? We don't know. Chicago at, 16 or whatever? I think that's way too high for them at this point in the season. Pittsburgh with their quarterback issues. They won 10 games last year with quarterback issues. They're good. But are they a little bit too high as well? And then Green Bay at 10 is just absolutely ridiculous to me. I'll never agree with that.
Yeah, that's from what we've seen from them and what we saw from them last season, what little they've done this offseason. I don't think 10 is worthy of where Green Bay should be. Another question I have coming out of these power rankings, they put who's on the hot seat. And for the Minnesota Vikings, they put Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah as the person on the hot seat for the team. Do you think that's right? Is the general manager, who's only heading into year 3 in his tenure, is he on the hot seat heading into this season?
I mean, I don't know if there's another option. I mean, who else would be on the hot seat on this roster or in this coaching staff? I mean, Kevin O'Connell, definitely not on the hot seat. He won 13 games in his first year, and then last year they were hit with so many injuries it was impossible to be good, and they still managed to be competitive. So you can't put him on the hot seat. I mean, you would have to see like a schism or lose the locker room kind of thing to happen for him to be on the hot seat. I think you have to pick Adolfo-Mensah just because there's nobody else you can pick. And it is fair in many regards because his first draft class was a total bust. Although Lewis Cine looked really, really good against the Browns in 64 preseason plays. So
what was that you just said about it being preseason, though?
Yeah, I know, exactly. That's just it. It's like there's that sliver of hope for the 2022 draft class if Lewis Cine can do anything. But, he doesn't have many draft picks next year. I honestly think replacing him after this season makes very little sense. You could still go into next year on a lame duck 1-year deal with him. You don't want to have a new draft, a new GM come in after the season, and you're saying, "Hey, here's this gift basket. There's 3 draft picks in it," because that's what you have. I mean, you're
Yeah.
throwing the new GM into a fire as well. So I really don't think anybody's on the hot seat. But if you had to pick somebody, it's definitely Quasey.
I would have made the case for Sam Darnold because he's on a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
Granted, it's not really a hot seat; it's just to prove yourself because your NFL career is essentially on the line. Whether you're going to go farther in the future in your career after this season, I would have made the case for Darnold.
Yeah, you know what? Another case you could make is Jordan Addison. I mean, you've got 2 speed
absolutely.
bumps, off the field. It's not looking good for him in that respect, but there's just so much talent there. And you look at what he did for Kenny Pickett at Pittsburgh and then at USC. The guy makes quarterbacks look really good. You have the 2 different ways you can look at football in many respects with a quarterback wide receiver relationship. You have the Brett Favre aspect where he throws guys open, and then you have the wide receiver aspect like Jefferson where he makes Kirk Cousins look like an MVP. So is Addison closer to a Jefferson level of player? I think he probably has that kind of potential. Is he going to set the world on fire and threaten 2,000 yards with Jefferson on the same roster? Probably not, but he's got the ability to make him and JJ one of the best 1-2 punches for a wide receiver core in the NFL, and maybe not even very close.
Yeah, absolutely. Plenty to get excited for the Vikings, despite the number 23 ranking, which transitions us into our second Vikings topic of the day. The scathing reviews are in, Joe. Dolphins QB Tua Tagovailoa didn't hold back when talking about his former head coach and now Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores. Tua, in a pre-recorded interview that is set to drop in full next week on the Dan Le Batard Show, said this.
Can you explain to us the difference in practical terms between having a coach who did believe in you the way that he did and the difference between that and what was happening with Flores?
Yeah. Well, to put it in simplest terms, if you woke up every morning and I told you you suck at what you did, that you don't belong doing what you do, that you shouldn't be here, that this guy should be here, that you haven't earned this right, and then you have somebody else come in and tell you, dude, you are the best fit for this. Like, you are accurate, you are the best whatever, you are this, you are that. Like, how would it make you feel listening to one or the other?
He also said, you see what I'm saying, and then you hear it regardless of what it is, the good or the bad, you hear it more and more, you start to actually believe it. I don't care who you are, you could be the President of the United States, you have a terrible person that's telling you things that you don't want to hear or that you probably shouldn't be hearing, you're going to start believing that about yourself, and that's sort of what ended up happening. Wow. Some harsh criticism of Brian Flores.
That's fair. From a self-confidence standpoint, I look in the mirror every day and I'm like, man, Joe, you're fat. And you know what? I believe it. But guess what? Some of it might be true. Sometimes you just got to be real with yourself. It's the old Randy Moss thing. Look at your shirt, Jonathan. It's the truth hurts. Sometimes people don't like hearing the truth, and that's why the truth hurts. So when Tua came in 2020, it wasn't exactly all roses and butterflies in the world. We had a pandemic going. There were no fans in the stands. It was Brian Flores' second year with a rebuilding roster. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure when you're the number 5 pick in the draft, and if you don't live up to it in the NFL, there are some hard asses who are going to come down on you. And everybody knows that Brian Flores comes from the Belichick tree, which is a hard-ass tree. If you want the apple to hit you on the head softly, sorry, that's not the way it comes from the Belichick Flores tree. Everybody in Minnesota speaks glowingly of Flores and how he puts players in positions to win. He doesn't force players like square pegs into round holes. He finds places for them to succeed. So if Tua couldn't see that coming from his head coach, maybe there was something deeper and darker that we don't know about, and he really is a terrible person. But by all accounts, this looks like a bridge being burned by somebody who's bitter, and he's taking his high-powered offensive genius behind him, Mike McDaniel, to the next level. Yeah, he's better under McDaniel than he was with Flores, but this is how you burn bridges. This is what you don't do in any business, unless you're like, hey, I'm Aaron Rodgers, or hey, I'm at this level, right? You can't burn bridges. He doesn't have enough authority or enough background, enough on his resume to do that kind of thing. So what's going to happen in the future if he struggles? Who's going to want him as a player if you're a head coach when you think that he might burn you for something where you're trying to be a heavy critic on a quarterback in an effort to make him better? It's the whole Mike Zimmer thing. Some guys in this modern era can't take hard coaching, and Tua sounds like a guy who can't take hard coaching. Mike
Yeah.
McDaniel is a player's coach. We all know this, right? Brian Flores is going to be hard on you. If Tua couldn't handle it, he couldn't handle it. And if you think that's what makes a person terrible in a business where you have to make cutthroat decisions, I think it's a bit unfair to go out and out a guy like Flores like he did on the Dan Le Batard show.
Yeah, it seems very harsh, but you look at the numbers, as you said. Tua in his first 2 years, 27 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. Wasn't really that great. Wasn't living up to the billing of a 5th overall pick. Since then, though, under Mike McDaniels, as you said, 8,000 yards passing, 54 touchdowns, 22 interceptions since that time. Obviously, a much different atmosphere there in Miami under Mike McDaniels, a more offensive-oriented system that depends or that relies heavily on throwing the ball to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, guys who are just speed burners up and down the field. The question off of this is, put aside the NFL lawsuit that's out there that we all know about with Brian Flores. With what he's done in Minnesota, you put these comments together, you put what he actually did in Miami, which was pretty successful in turning around a pretty porous Miami defense. Do we see him get another opportunity as a head coach? Because Kevin O'Connell said he's happy that he didn't, but he's shocked that he didn't get a job elsewhere, but he's happy to have him stay in Minnesota as long as he can.
I don't know. There's you could go a lot of different ways with this answer, but in the NFL, I think once you get blacklisted, so to speak, it's hard to come back in. That might be the case with Brian Flores. Nobody knows for sure. Maybe Brian does. Maybe the Vikings do. Maybe the Dolphins and Stephen Ross, their owner, know. Maybe other owners around the league know. We don't know. It's all speculation. But go ask Colin Kaepernick what he thinks about being blacklisted, because he's been trying to get back in the NFL for going on a decade, it seems like now, and it's not happening. No matter how many openings there are, no matter how talented the quarterbacks are depth-wise around the NFL, it may not matter how qualified Brian Flores is if this is a bit of a blacklisting going on. I don't know that it is. Nobody really does for sure, but it sure seems like it. So if I were to guess, if he puts together a top 5 defense in year 2 with Minnesota and a defensive line that looked like it was going to be crap, in a quarterback room that looked like it was going to be crap before the Stephen Gilmore signing, maybe he does earn another opportunity. But the fact that he did not get a single interview after what he did last year to improve a devastatingly bad Vikings defense under Ed Donatel to what it was in 2023, it's not a good outlook.
Right, it absolutely isn't. Another question is, after these comments and how Tua has turned around his career, if a team fires their head coach, generally things aren't good, they're transitioning to a new quarterback and a new system entirely. Would a team want a guy who has the track record with a young quarterback like Brian Flores to take charge?
I mean, it depends on the mentality and the culture you're creating, right? Do you want a guy who's going to be old school and going to be hard on you, but put players in the right position to win? Yeah, I mean, if I'm the owner and I'm the general manager and I'm making that hire, I 100% support that, because I truly believe that you want to have a mentor, a leader in a locker room who you're afraid to let down. That's when you perform your best. It's accountability 101. So, I would 100% support that.
That's fair. Another topic of the day, chasing first, not just in the AL Central, but maybe in all of Major League Baseball. The Twins just took 3 of 4 off of the Rangers this weekend ahead of a 3-game series against the Padres that starts late Monday night. Minnesota are now just 2 games back of the Guardians for first place in the AL Central. But, Joe, they are just 3 games back of having the best record in all of Major League Baseball. According to Tankathon, the Twins have the 10th toughest remaining schedule in baseball. The Guardians have the 11th toughest remaining schedule in baseball. Can the Twins take the AL Central, or can they finish with the number 1 seed in the MLB playoffs?
I mean, strength of schedule-wise, it's going to be tough because the Orioles and Yankees have it a little bit easier from here on out. Again, you look at the strength of schedule rankings at Tankathon, and I think the Twins have a .509 winning percentage against their remaining 38 opponents. The Orioles and Yankees are at, .494. We're not talking about a big difference here, and it can go up and down one way or another. The one thing that I will say is, I think, going to happen is the Twins chasing down and eclipsing the Guardians. The Guardians technically have a slightly easier schedule by like 0.02 percentage points, so it's not a big difference. But they're going to New York Monday through Wednesday, starting tonight, and they're going to face AL Rookie of the Year candidate Luis Gil, who, of course, the Yankees got from the Twins. Mm-hmm. And then on Wednesday night, they got to face Garrett Cole. And I don't know if you've checked Garrett Cole's game log of late, but since he came back from injury, it was a little rocky, and now he looks like the Cy Young Award winner that he was last season. So I got a feeling the Guardians are going to lose at least 2 out of 3 in New York after getting swept over the weekend. And the Twins, it's not going to be easy, but they're in San Diego against one of the hottest teams in baseball in the Padres. If they can come out of San Diego with 2, or dare we say a sweep, we could be looking at a first-place team by the middle of this week here in Minnesota. Yeah. And it's, the fact that they're even in this conversation is reason why Rocco Baldelli deserves Manager of the Year consideration. I mean, this team's got 46 or whatever games out of Royce Lewis, who's their best hitter. Carlos Correa has been out for over a month after he was only supposed to be out for like a week around the All-Star break, and there's no timeline for his return. Byron Buxton's played in 90 of 130 games or whatever it is, and now he's back on the shelf. So you lose Joe Ryan. He got a second opinion. Sorry about the semi-noise out here. He got a second opinion on his triceps injury, and it did not go well, so he might be out for the rest of the season. You've got 3 rookies in your starting rotation. Your bullpen's been up and down. I mean, the fact that they're in this conversation is remarkable, and it's a testament to the overall talent and depth of this squad. Nobody saw this coming, but it really is all about David Festa, Zebby Matthews, Simeon Woods-Richardson, and then you have Bailey Ober, who's quietly snuck into the Cy Young conversation over the last 2.5 months. He's been arguably baseball's best pitcher over the last 2.5 months. You can't hit the guy right now. They've got a starting staff that has absolutely zero business doing what they're doing, but they're doing it. If they continue to do it for the next 6 weeks, they could find themselves with the best record in baseball, and that's a miracle.
So the question off of that is, we know that Minnesota in the playoffs hasn't done well over the history, though they turned that around. They started turning that around last year. If they make the playoffs with all the injuries, with the pitching staff that looks like it's being put together by duct tape and glue at this point, what are their prospects in the playoffs?
It's terrifying. It's terrifying.
Especially if they get the Yankees.
Well, yeah, I mean, you get the Yankees, you get the Orioles, you get the Astros, who have one of the better records in baseball, right there with the Twins since mid-April. I mean, all of these teams went out and upgraded their rotations. The Twins did not. In fact, the Twins depleted their rotation with the Joe Ryan injury. So if Joe Ryan's not back for the playoffs, you're legitimately looking at Pablo Lopez in Game 1, or Bailey Ober in Game 1, then Lopez in Game 2, vice versa. And then 3 rookies to choose from for games 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whoever it shakes out. Well, I mean, that's terrifying. This is why it's almost critical that the Twins do claim the best record in the American League. It's very possible. 3 games back with 38 games to go, they could do it. But if they can play at home in those conditions and not have to send Zebby Matthews to the mound in New York, I mean, come on. That's going to be big. It's always terrifying come postseason play because some other team's going to have the $45 million pitcher and the Twins are not. That's the way it's always been. Can they overcome it? I mean, it might be up to the bats this season and some big-time unexpected performances from these young guys.
First pitch of that game tonight between the Padres and the Twins takes place at 8:40 p.m. Central Time, so a late-night one for that. Speaking of the playoffs, Karl-Anthony Towns, in our 4th topic of the day, revealed that his knee was more bothersome than anyone in Minnesota's anyone in Minnesota knew about in their playoff run. In the most recent episode of the podcast P with Paul George, Towns revealed that his knee was flaring up and was super swollen, saying,
I felt really good and I understood the situation. So I was kind of not worried about 100%, 90%, 80%, whatever that was. I didn't really think of it in any sort of like that. So I was doing what was needed to make it happen. And I think when we got later and later and we started getting deeper into the playoffs, that's when the things started showing why I came back so quick. Knee started flaring up, started being super swollen. Some days I couldn't practice just because it was just unable to walk. So it was like, I can't do it.
He continued, I don't think it was a disappointment in any sort of fashion. We said early on in the year that we wanted to do something special, the big lineup. Everyone's like, it couldn't work. And I was like, and I was like, watch it work. Some really revealing comments from Karl-Anthony Towns. What are your thoughts off that podcast interview that you wrote about over on Minnesota Timberwolves on SI?
Yeah, I mean, I listened. He was on with Paul George for about 45 minutes, and it seemed like they recorded that back in July, and they just released it today, along with Chet Holmgren being on that episode. So it's a little bit outdated, but he said in that this is mid-July, so about a month and change after the Timberwolves were knocked out of the Western Conference Finals by Dallas, that his knee was still bothering him. Not that it was still bothering him, but that, to this day it was still lingering somewhat.
Yeah.
Not like it's going to impact him at the start of the season. He had another quote in there where he said he feels confident that he's going to be healthy and ready to go at the start of the regular season, which would be absolutely terrible if he wasn't, because it was not like a full repair of the meniscus in his knee like J.J. McCarthy of the Vikings just had this last week. This was a lateral repair, kind of a minor thing where it kept him out weeks, not months. So he missed a month, came back, but you could really see his struggles with his shot, especially late in the playoffs. And it was after Game 3 against Denver in the second round where his shot went to bleep. I mean, over the next 9 games, I think he hit something like 11 out of 52 threes. He was shooting 23 or 24% from downtown. Very unlike him as the best big man shooter in the history of the NBA, as he says. Although I'll say this, in that podcast, he did kind of give Dirk Nowitzki his props as the greatest big man shooter of all time. So kind of snuck that one in there. Maybe he felt a little heat from his comments in the past, but it was clearly an issue. He was clearly laboring some physically in the playoffs, and I don't think it was the reason the Timberwolves lost that series. They just had absolutely no answer for Luka and Kyrie in that Dallas series. With Rudy on the floor, it was a liability in a lot of different ways offensively. So, they could hide Luka on the defensive end, and that had nothing to do with Karl-Anthony Towns' knee. But the fact that he was playing through and gutting out a lot of that knee pain is pretty impressive.
So 2 years in a row now, Karl-Anthony Towns has had some leg injuries that have caused him to miss some time. This time it wasn't as much as the previous season, but it still obviously impacted him in the playoffs. How do the Wolves keep him healthy this coming season when there are a lot of expectations on this Timberwolves club?
Load management. You know what? Honestly, you look at the Western Conference, it's super deep. It's super tough. I looked at the Timberwolves schedule that dropped last week, and it's hard to look at any stretch and be like, yeah, that's going to be easy. So, the best case scenario for them is to maybe limit his minutes. I don't know if those minutes go to Luka Garza or Leonard Miller or somebody else on the roster, but when you look at the Timberwolves, if they are a top 4 team in the West like they're supposed to be, maybe they can take the approach that some of these other proven teams have done in the past. They've taken the road where they're giving players a little bit of load management. Maybe it's not full off nights so the fans get their money's worth, but maybe instead of playing them 34 minutes a night, you're playing them 28 minutes a night. If you're as good as you're supposed to be, you should be able to do that and still compete for home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs. That's really the goal, right? You want the number 1 seed, but you want first round home court advantage. Just get in the top 4, get in the dance, and then let your talent do the talking. But you're right. Towns has dealt with quite a few injuries here over the last 2-3 seasons, and we've just read all about this with J.J. McCarthy, where it's like, man, you hurt your meniscus, there's a pretty good chance you're going to re-injure it in the future, right? Especially when it's not the full repair. And Cat did not have the full repair. He had the calf injury 2 seasons ago that limited him to, like 25 games. And now this one, if he re-injures it, it's going to be a big setback. And it's not just the playoff hopes you're talking about here. Karl-Anthony Towns being injured before the All-Star break in February, that could be a disaster as well, because if the Timberwolves want to have any opportunity to cut down on the luxury tax prices they're going to pay in the future, it's by trading Cat before next year's trade deadline. If he's injured before the trade deadline and you can't trade him and you're like, okay, we want to trade him, we're not in contention this year for whatever reason, you lose that opportunity. And then he'd be coming off the injury after the season. You don't want that either. Trade value just goes down the drain. So there's a million reasons why you'd want to use load management and try to keep him healthy for as long as possible.
So then, surprise 5th topic of the day. I want bold predictions from you on all 3 of these topics, on all 3 of these teams that we talked about. The Vikings, do they make the playoffs this year? Twins, are they going to be the first place team in the AL Central or the American League in general? And the Wolves, what are your predictions for their season?
Oh, man. Okay. So the Vikings, we'll start with them. Do they make the playoffs? No.
No?
No.
All right.
I have a hard time believing that Sam Darnold plays 17 games. And if there's a backup quarterback situation for any amount of time, the Vikings are in trouble and the schedule's really tough. I want to believe that they'll be really competitive, but, yeah, I can't see that happening.
Twins?
2, yes, Twins will win the division. They will chase down the Guardians. They will get to the playoffs. I mean, they're going to be in the playoffs either way, but I do think they win the division.
Okay.
I just think there's no way they don't get in as a wild card team at a minimum. And then 3, Timberwolves. Oh, my God, that's tough.
The whole season.
I think they take a slight step back this year because the West is so good.
Yeah.
I really do. I could see them being a top 4 seed. They were 3 last year. Could have easily been the 2 or the 1. They were in that chase with Oklahoma City and Denver. So, but I do think they take a slight step. No, you know what? That's a stupid opinion. You want to know why? Because Ansah year older and Jaden McDaniels is going to improve his game. That's a stupid opinion. You're not taking a step back.
We couldn't have you have a reasonable
put
take
me
on
on the
here.
spot. I have to switch gears here. No, they take a step forward this year.
Ooh.
They're even better than they were last season, and I do think they'll be really, really dangerous. I mean, it's just
First place
obvious.
in the West?
I mean, yeah, you got a great shot at being first place in the West, but in terms of the team that's more dangerous than any other to make a deep run in the playoffs, there's nobody else. It is Minnesota.
I like it. That's been Joe Nelson. I am Jonathan Harrison for Bring Me the Sports. Minnesota sports fans will be back tomorrow to talk to you about everything happening across Minnesota sports. Talk to you then.